Well, tonight we'll see how far I can make it. If we make it all the way to the end of what I'm, planned to do, prepared to do, or if my voice doesn't hold out long enough, we'll see. I don't want to overdo it tonight. I want to get around that bend so it's completely better soon. I did my share of overdoing it on Saturday and Sunday, so we'll give it a little rest tonight. But it was all for good. It was all good on Sunday, and Saturday. Certainly no regrets there. But continuing in looking at Islam, and we're going to pick up where we left off last week with the centuries of conquest. That there was a long history of over 1,000 years where they conquered much of the world. And we talk about the fall of Constantinople and the Ottoman Turks and their expansion, and that's really where we left off last week. And then that brings us to the expansion halted in the 18th century. So the European colonialism both stopped and reversed many of the gains that were made in the previous 1,000 years. Several countries that had been governed by Muslims for centuries, including Egypt, India, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula, were controlled by the British. The Dutch ruled Indonesia, the French controlled Morocco and Algeria, and the Italians controlled Libya for the most part. Encyclopedia Britannica says this about the end of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire disintegrated and was partitioned after its defeat in World War I. Now, the Ottoman Empire had already been in decline, but particularly in World War I, that was the end of that. It disintegrated and was partitioned after its defeat in World War I. The empire had already been in decline for centuries, struggling to maintain a bloated bureaucracy or a centralized administrative structure after various attempts at reform. The problem was exacerbated further by the rise of more localized interests across the empire, such as the rise of nationalist movements. Upon the Ottomans' defeat in World War I, a combination of nationalist movements and partition agreements among the Allied powers forced its disintegration into numerous territories, with Turkey as the empire's immediate successor. And here's a map of that chronicles the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire from 1807 to 1924. And you see in the, this is from Encyclopedia Britannica, so you see in the further reaches up into what was then Moldavia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and some of those other places there, Greece and Macedonia. Those were gradual losses. So in the furthest reaches, and then down in the south with Egypt, and I think Libya, that's modern day Libya, yep, Benghazi's there, where it says Cyrenaica, I think that's what that says. It says to Italy in 1912, but that would be Benghazi, which was Libya. So those areas were lost by the Ottoman Empire, and as the years went on, they would continue to lose territory. The empire boundary, that dotted line, is the boundary in 1807, and then gradually they would just lose more territory, and then that was the culmination of that was the establishment of the Republic of Turkey in 1924, which is that purple area. And so that, and I'll be honest with you, there are some people, they're just a history buff and they eat, sleep, and drink history. I like history to a certain extent, but I don't delve into all the little things of every war and all these things. I like geography. Geography is a real big fascination and interest of mine. But one of the things that there's times where there's certain events and groups and powers throughout history where I don't always put the pieces together of what time frame, have the right conception of time. And so it's kind of actually, for me, it was a little surprising to capture in my mind and picture that the Ottoman Empire lasted all the way up to 1924. You know, that's 100 years ago almost. And that it was that recent just doesn't really, I think of Ottoman empires, you know, way back in the many years, centuries earlier, but which that was its heyday, was centuries earlier than that. But there's just certain things I learn over time where I'm thinking, wow, that puts that in perspective of that particular group or empire. And so it's quite fascinating to see the changes that take place, in some of them more recent than what we have thought. So there was the expansion of Islam that was halted in the 18th century, by and large in the 18th century, and it led into the 19th century as well. And then the culmination in the early 20th century there with the Ottoman Empire coming to an end. But that was not going to last. That halting of the expansion would not last, and that would give way. Actually, let me back up here. Let me read. So that gives way to Islamic nationalism. So Islam then went on the march again, just in a different way. It was not one big empire. It was now individual nations that were being formed and gaining their independence, that were Islamic nations. Now you also have these the groups that are widely known as terrorist groups. You might think of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of these. There are different fringe groups out there. When I say fringe, I'm talking about that groups that transcend national boundaries, that then have a desire to establish a caliphate, or have this desire to overtake lands, and it's not quite the same as their respective national boundaries. And so there are those out there that they would like to reestablish some sort of empire, or big vast area of land on some level. Now, British and French rule over the Middle East was limited as a movement of Islamic nationalism emerged after World War I. Egypt gained its independence from Britain in 1922. Libya gained its independence later in 1951. Indonesia won its independence from the Netherlands in 1945. And the more dedicated a Muslim is to the literal interpretation of the Quran, the more political their faith is. And so something about these Muslim nations is that the concepts like freedom of speech and freedom of religion that have been hallmarks of Western civilization, by and large, are not typically found in Muslim countries. But the response to those who would leave Islam varies from country to country regarding the level of how harsh they are to the people who would leave Islam. But some countries have very harsh anti-conversion laws. So not only is it, excuse me, not only do they have not only are they harsh to those who would leave Islam, they're also harsh to those who would try to convert others to their faith. Now, ironically enough, this is where having a well-rounded view of the world comes into play, that we don't get out of balance one way or another. There are some places where Muslims are the ones that are being persecuted, such as in India, where Hindu nationalists both treat Christians badly, and they also don't like the Muslims. And then you have in China, in the Uyghur province, it's predominantly Muslim, and the Chinese, the communists, have treated the Muslims badly there as well. So it's an interesting dynamic to see, but we're looking more, by and large, at what the primary history of Islam is, and is, in general, the countries most hostile to freedom of religion are the Islamic countries, for the most part. There are others, like some predominantly Buddhist and Hindu countries, where they're increasingly hostile to religion, but Islam certainly would stand at the top of that. But it really just depends. Some places have the death penalty as the result of converting to Islam. Others maybe imprisonment or fines or whatever it might be. And so the response varies from country to country, but generally it is a It comes from a biblical or Judeo-Christian heritage that respected freedom of religion, and is what gave us the Western civilization, the society that we have, not just America, but also Britain, what Britain used to be. Britain is changing a lot. A lot of European countries are changing a lot, and that's a result of their rejection of the Bible. There was actually the European Court. I didn't put this in there, but back in 2018, there was a certain European Court of Human Rights, or whatever court it was. I think it was in Austria, but it was a bigger European type of court or tribunal type thing, and they ruled against a woman for criticizing Islam, because she, in some sort of speech, or she called Muhammad a pedophile because he had married a 6-year-old girl. Well, technically he betrothed her at 6 and kind of married at 9. But so she just said, well, that sounds like a pedophile. And so she got fined, and that was upheld in the European courts, that it was a violation of, that basically it was not a violation of her freedom of speech to say that she could not talk like that. So we see various issues happening regarding freedom of speech, and Islam in Europe is one of the more controversial ones, where you have, in general, a lot of those countries now in Europe they brought in much immigration from Islamic countries, but then you also have a hardcore group, maybe minority of people, but some that are radical the other way, that then go out of their way to try to bash Islam or make fun of Muhammad, or things that would then go so far the other way, that's kind of a reaction to their what they're seeing happen in these countries. So a lot of different dynamics, but in many ways Islam is at the center of it. And then we see the authority of Islam. What do they have as their authority? We have the Bible. We use the Bible as our authority for faith and practice. We look to this, look to the Scripture. The Muslims, first and foremost, look to the Quran, and the Quran is their Muslim holy book. It consists of 114 chapters and 6,616 verses. The source of the Quran is said to be the revelations of Allah to Muhammad through Gabriel. It is said to be the final revelation from God, as the Bible is incomplete. That Muhammad was the final prophet, where there were revelations given that then completed the revelation from God. Quran 6, 114 and 115 says, "Shall I seek a judge other than Allah, while it is He who has sent down unto you the book," which is the Quran, "explained in detail? Those unto whom we gave the Scripture, the Torah, and the Injil, the Gospel," they say, those unto whom we gave the Scripture, the Torah or Torah, and the Injil, the Gospel, know that it is revealed from your Lord in truth, so be not of those who doubt. And so they're saying that there were the holy books given, there was the Torah given to the Jews, and then the Gospel given, speaking of the Bible, and Torah is the written Torah is there in the beginning of the Bible as well. But they would say that the Quran is a completion of that, and is a greater revelation than what the Bible is, what the Torah is. But there's a contradiction there. It says in 16:101, it says, "And when we change a verse of the Quran in place of another, and Allah knows best what He sends down, they, the disbelievers, say, you, O Muhammad, but a muftari, or a forger, a liar. Nay, but most of them know not." And so they would say that the Quran is inspired and doesn't change, but yet there's another verse that says, when we change a verse in place of another, But basically, Allah knows best. He can change things, but at the same time, they would say that no, the Quran is the settled final revelation. Another part of their authority that is just second to the Quran is the Hadith, and the Hadith are writings that are said, and there are multiple writings that are called the Hadith. But they're said to be a record of Muhammad's sayings and practices. Now, one of the things that I read said that that whether something was inspired for the Quran or was just simply another saying or practice of Muhammad depended on what his response to it, to the revelation was, if he had some sort of physical response to him getting a message from Allah. Depending on how he responded to it, that was an indication if it was an inspired Quran or if it was another saying in practice. But they hold high regard the Hadith, these traditions, these teachings, the sayings and practices of Muhammad. So they look to Muhammad as an example, and very, very important to them. Yes.
Have you read what maybe a physical response might be to something that you thought was divinely inspired?
I don't remember what it said. It would be like when he's getting the revelation. I don't remember if it said like if he shook or if he had, that was the type of physical response. And then I don't know 100% if it was shaking, but basically that was one of the things that I read in some of these facts about Islam. There was this whole list of things, and it indicated that there was a difference in when he got a revelation, when he got something. And I don't want to say 100% it was shaking, but it was something like that there would be some, it was something greater and supernatural happening when he was getting the revelation for the Quran, as opposed to his other sayings. That's supposedly what it is. So Muhammad is often portrayed as a virtuous man, but he had some glaring issues regarding, he was a man, very much a warrior. He was someone who was known as being very fierce. And when people say that Islam is a religion of peace, well, the roots of Islam are not peace. It's not a religion of peace in its roots. Now, there may be peaceful Muslims, but the principles of the religion are having to do with conquest and taking over, and that's a lot of what the very fundamentals are. And so they're called, often those who try to practice that are called radical Islamics. So this doesn't represent the mainstream. Now, if you were here in Sunday school on Sunday, I showed a video, a message, or at least as much of a message as we could fit in, that was preached by Sam Davison a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, at a church, and he and it was interesting. The message was about having a radical faith, and he defined what radical is, and it was very interesting. I had not heard that before, because I don't know that I had ever looked up radical. When we think of radical, we kind of get a picture of what radical means without looking it up. But really, radical comes back to a starting point or the fundamentals. And so radical is basically, it's different than what is considered the moderate or mainstream. And so, but radical comes back to the fundamentals. And so we would believe, people would call us, oh, you're fundamental Baptist. What do they mean by that? Well, we might be called radical because we take a much stronger stand on certain things regarding the Word of God and doctrine than perhaps the mainstream Christianity does. And so it is with Islam. They would say, oh, they're just radical, or they're just the fundamental Islamists. Well, that should tell you something about the root of what the religion is that when Muslims come to America or are born in America and they practice their religion, there's a lot of moderate Islam, as far as they're not looking to, there's not as much violence and killing people and all that, but there are some. There has been Islamic violence, particularly among families, where even fathers will do something to their daughters because of that she stepped out of line in some way with their religion. There are things like that come up periodically. It's often glossed over by the news media. Now, one of the interesting things about it's just it's amazing how the dynamics change that you don't really anticipate over time, but how actually now, when it comes to this transgender and the drag queens and the LGBT things, that Christians who are against that are finding more in common with the Muslims who are against that as well. And there was I think it was Hamtramck. There's a couple different cities and suburbs of Detroit and Michigan that are predominantly Islamic. I think one of them has at least one of them has an all-Islamic city council, and I think it was Hamtramck. It's whatever. It's that one or it's Dearborn. Dearborn's the other one. I think Hamtramck is the one where they said, look, we're not flying the pride flag. We're not putting an approval on that type of lifestyle. So what's interesting is, in some ways, to those non-Muslims who are against that, those who maybe profess to be Christians or even not non-Christians but still against that, they would look at that and say, hey, wow, we agree with the Muslims on that. So it's an interesting dynamic of what's happening, and there's all kinds of realms. Just like any religion, there's a broad spectrum of different kinds of people in a religion, but it's important to look at the fundamentals and the foundation of what is taught there to see there's a reason why among Muslims in Islamic countries there's been a lot more violence, a lot more killing, and a lot more hostility to other religions. It's because of what their belief system is, what they're taught in their holy book and these books about Muhammad. Bukhari is one of those who compiled. He has a version of the Hadith and compiled some teachings there. Book 9, volume 87, Hadith 57 says, some Zanadika or atheists were brought to Ali and he burnt them. The news of this event reached Ibn Abbas, who said, if I had been in his place, I would not have burnt them, as Allah's apostle forbade it, saying, do not punish anybody with Allah's punishment, which is fire. I would have killed them according to the statement of Allah's apostle, whosoever changed his Islamic religion, then kill him. Hadith 58 says, Abu Musa said, I came to the Prophet, that's Muhammad, along with two men from the tribe of Asharian, one on my right and the other on my left, while Allah's apostle was brushing his teeth with a siwak, and both men asked him for some employment. The Prophet said, O Abu Musa, I said, by him who sent you with the truth, these two men did not tell me what was in their hearts, and I did not feel or realize that they were seeking employment. As if I were looking now at his siwak being drawn to a corner under his lips, he said, we never, or we do not appoint for our affairs anyone who seeks to be employed. But O Abu Musa, or Abdullah bin Qas, go to Yemen. The Prophet then sent Mu'ad bin Jabal after him, and when Mu'ad reached him, he spread out a cushion for him and requested him to get down and sit on the cushion. Behold, there was a fettered man beside Abu Musa. Mu'ad asked, who is this? Abu Musa, he was a Jew and became a Muslim and then reverted back to Judaism. Then Abu Musa requested Mu'ad to sit down, but Mu'ad said, I will not sit down till he has been killed. This is the judgment of Allah and his apostle for such cases, and repeated it thrice. Then Abu Musa ordered that the man be killed, and he was killed. Abu Musa added, then we discussed the night prayers, and one of us said, I pray and sleep, and I hope that Allah will reward me for my sleep as well as for my prayers. I had a hard time following that whole strain, but what you get the point is that those who had converted to Islam and then back away from Islam, then they were advocating the killing of them. The Quran allows another aspect of Islam and Muhammad the Quran allows Muslim men to marry up to 4 women. Quran 4:2 says, and give unto orphans their property, and do not exchange bad things for good ones, and devour not their substance by adding it to your substance. Surely this is a great sin. And 4:3 says, and if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with the orphan girls, then marry other women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But if you fear that you shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one, or the slaves that your right hands possess, that is nearer to prevent you from doing injustice. Now, Muhammad had more than 4 due to Allah's favor. Quran 33:51, you, O Muhammad, postpone whom you will of them, your wives, and you may receive whom you will, and whomsoever you desire of those whom you have set aside, her term temporarily, it is no sin on you to receive her again. That is better, that they may be comforted and not grieved, and may all be pleased with what you give them. Allah knows what is in your hearts, and Allah is ever all-knowing, most forbearing. 33:37 says, and remember when you said to him, that was Zayd bin Haritha, the freed slave of the Prophet, on whom Allah has bestowed grace by guiding him to Islam, and you, O Muhammad, too, have done favor. Keep your wife to yourself and fear Allah, but you did hide in yourself what Allah has already made known to you, that He will give her to you in marriage. That which Allah will make manifest, you did fear the people, i.e. they're saying that Muhammad married the divorced wife of his manumitted slave, whereas Allah had a better right that you should fear Him. So when Zayd had accomplished his desire from her, i.e. divorced her, we gave her to you in marriage, so that in future there may be no difficulty to the believers in respect of the marriage of the wives of their adopted sons when the latter have no desire to keep them, i.e. they have divorced them, and Allah's command must be fulfilled. Now, a late Pakistani scholar named Mufti Muhammad Shafii wrote this commentary on that verse. He said, as ordered by the Prophet, in parentheses, the marriage of Zainab was solemnized with Zayd, but their temperaments did not match and merge with each other. Zayd used to complain about the sharpness of her tongue, the airs she assumed because of her inborn lineal nobility, and her failure to listen to him. On the other side, the Prophet was informed through revelation that Zayd would divorce her, whereafter she would be married to him. On a certain day, Zayd presented these very complaints before the Holy Prophet and showed his intention to divorce her. The Holy Prophet had, though, come to know through divine revelation that things would transpire in a way that Zayd would divorce her, after which she would be married to him. He stopped Zayd from giving a divorce because crossing his blessed heart there was the thought, if Zayd were to give divorce and Zainab were to be married to him consequently, the Arabs would, very much in line with their custom of Jahiliyyah, throw taunts on him that he had married the wife of his son. And it was the wife of his son. What the Holy Prophet said was correct and sound in its place, but after having learnt about the event as it would transpire through divine revelation, and after the intention of Nikah with Zainab having emerged in his heart, this advice of not divorcing given to Zayd had remained at the level of a sort of formal expression of good wishes, something not appropriate to the station of a messenger of Allah, particularly so because along with it, included therein was the apprehension of taunts from the people. Therefore, the admonition was revealed in the words which mean, you were concealing in your heart what Allah was going to reveal. When the information about his marriage with Zainab was conveyed to him from Allah, and the intention of marriage had already crossed his heart, then the act of hiding this intention and indulging such formal remarks was not appropriate to his station. As for the apprehension of taunts from the people, it was said, and you were fearing people, while Allah is more entitled to be feared by you. In other words, when you knew that this thing is going to take place as a matter destined by Allah, without there being any apprehension or danger of His displeasure in that case, then simply because of the apprehension of taunts from people, such remarks were not appropriate. And so what he was claiming is that Allah had told him this would happen, and there was a couple times of this where things were meant, and same thing with the young girl, that these things were ordained by Allah, And so when you hear about the issue of these of Islamic men and how they treat women, and they're taking multiple wives and even young, very young wives, that goes all the way back to the very beginning with Muhammad, and at the root of their teachings. Not every Muslim may practice that as far as a Muslim man having 4 wives, but those things go back to the roots of the Islamic religion. And he is well known for betrothing a 6-year-old girl and consummating at 9. He was in his 50s at the time. Defenders of this, and I was reading a piece where they were really defending this, and it was from an Islamic perspective of defending it. And one of the things that they said was, well, societal norms were different. The maturation of the body happened at different ages at that time, and so there was just these different things that were just trying to be justifications of that. But the thing is, young girls are still married off to Muslim men today in certain countries, certain places where they still practice that. Now the thing is, child marriages are not limited to Muslims, to be sure. But the fact is, I mean, a practice like that is certainly ripe for abuse, and I realize we are all in a society where that is off-putting to us. But I think I think part of it is not necessarily just what our societal influence has been and what the societal acceptance is in this time. It's just generally, just the idea when you have a 50-some-year-old man with a girl less than 10, that just naturally kind of is going to rub you the wrong way, I would think. But that is what Muhammad did, and it was the daughter of basically his right-hand man, or the man who was really just below him, and he was very supportive of it. Supposedly the writings of this girl is that she was very mature and she was all for this, and they just had some, like almost portraying it as like, yep, this was a regular husband-wife relationship and all these things, but that's how they try to portray it. This isn't a matter of, there are certain times where in the past it's possible that children might have been ready for marriage a little bit sooner, but I would say I don't know of any culture where a 9-year-old would have been a good candidate for marriage, and let alone to a 50-some-year-old man. But that is what happened. That's not a disputed fact. It is something that they will say. They will just say, well, this is the reason why it was okay, and things were different back then and in that part of the world, and all of these things. So, but these things are rooted in their teaching, the Quran and the Hadith, that these are the root issues and root things of Islam. But those are their 2 primary authorities, of the Quran and the Hadith. And there's so many of these writings and so many different teachers and scholars of Islam that there's a lot of fraction in Islam based on who are the teachers, who are the scholars. There's a lot of interpretation that things are left up to, because I mean there's a lot to it in these writings. And so that's where we're going to stop with the authority, and we're going to get in next time to the actual basic doctrine of Islam, and as we finish up the history tonight and just overview of the authority. And my voice did hold out for the entire time, and that's a good sign. So by Sunday, maybe be as good as new, hopefully.